So this event is being hosted by Mr. Goldman's genocide class from the first semester, and we are glad to have this opportunity and to be able to teach you through history in this way that is becoming very limited. We have been able to help host this event, which is an extremely proud thing that we have been given. We want to make sure that we treat Mr. Wilkens and his history that he has brought us with respect. So I have a couple of requests for our audience. We ask that you silence your phones and put them away for the remainder of the event because they will not be necessary. We are recording both audio and visual, so please refrain from having any side conversations because the talking will be picked up on the mics. After Mr. Wilkens has given us a story of his life and told us a little bit about himself, then we are going to have the opportunity to ask him some questions that we have. So now I'm going to hand the mic over to Felicia to tell you a little more about the Rwanda genocide.
Hi everyone, I'm Felicia Familaro, a senior here at E.O. Smith. The Rwandan genocide was one of the world's lesser known, quickest, and most brutal genocides, and it continues to affect the people of Rwanda to this day. More than 800,000 people, predominantly Tutsi and moderate Hutu people, were ruthlessly murdered in less than 3 months in one of the worst periods in modern human history. While tension between these two groups had been brewing prior, this period of violence began when on April 6, 1994, a plane carrying Rwandan president, a Hutu, was shot down, killing everyone on board. Hutu radicals accused the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, an exiled Tutsi rebel organization, and initiated a massacre campaign against Tutsis. The RPF claims the plane was shot down by Hutus to justify the genocide. Hutu authorities sent kill lists to militias familiar with local areas for them to find and murder Tutsis. Because they feared for their safety, Hutu husbands even murdered their Hutu wives, and neighbors turned on their neighbors. Each day, up to 10,000 people were slaughtered. 70% of the Tutsi people and more than 10% of Rwanda's entire population were wiped out. This genocide ended in July 1994 when the RPF, supported by Uganda's army, seized further territory and assumed control of Rwanda. It's our desire with this event that we will leave with not only a richer understanding, but also a renewed understanding that we must never be complacent. I will now pass the mic to Joya. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joya Miller. I'm a junior here at E.O. Smith. At the time of the genocide, our speaker, Mr. Carl Wilkens, was working as a missionary in Rwanda with his wife and his 3 children. When violence escalated into genocide in the country, almost every foreigner had the chance to be evacuated by the UN, but the Tutsis were not given that same offer, and they had to remain in their home, in their home country with the threat of impending heinous violence. Foreigners chose to save themselves or their Tutsi neighbors and friends whose lives were at stake. With the choice to leave with his family to safety, Mr. Wilkens decided to stay in Rwanda during the genocide because he felt that it would be unjust not to at least try to save his Rwandan friends and family, or friends and neighbors. What he did was extremely brave, and it could not have been a very easy decision to make. By the close of the genocide, Mr. Wilkens had saved almost 400 people from the senseless murder of the Hutus. Once he returned home, he continued his work to educate people on what had happened. In 2008, he created his organization, World Outside My Shoes, to speak about his experience in schools and elsewhere. One of the main focuses of his teachings is how human connection can prevent harmful conflict, and that's what we've gathered here today to discuss. Thank you all again so much for coming, and thank you to the E.O. Smith Social Studies Department, to the Human Rights Club, to UConn's Connecticut Writing Project, and E.O. Smith's Deliberation and Discourse. Without them, this event and others like it can't happen. And thank you a million times over to Mr. Wilkens for giving us his time and this amazing experience. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Mr. Carl Wilkens.
Thank you, each one of them. Each one of you, that warm welcome. And I think about all the hours, not just preparation, but study. And I mean, I know I loved homework. Yeah. Not. But I hope, yeah, it doesn't feel like just another study or class. I mean, obviously for me, it was our story, you know, it was part of our life. And I'm just really grateful for Joe and the whole team here for the chance to share a few stories. I'm really looking forward to some conversation. I was asking a couple of you at the beginning, what do you think the students really want to hear about? And they were talking about, reasons, why, motivation, how it affects you. I really feel bad if I finish a visit and we don't talk about PTSD and trauma. Or for example, if you're looking for a question and you're just not sure about one, ask me to talk about the difference between remembering and reliving. Big difference there. I'd love to talk about that. I got like 100 rabbit holes I could go down, and so I try to stay on track with a few pictures. Let's see, if I push this button, it should switch us over, and it's probably going to do that in a moment. There we go. Yeah. And so I'm also a visual learner, and so I've got just lots of pictures because that's what works with me. And I often like to start with something that's not genocide, because Rwanda, for so many people, it's hard to change a bad reputation, huh? And while this is tea, not coffee, some of you might know Rwandan coffee. And some of you, of course, the gorilla that was just there, that's what Rwanda is famous for. It's actually becoming a tourist destination, not just for gorillas, though, but mountain bikes and all kinds of fun stuff in this gorgeous little country. I actually need to make a newer slide here. This is probably 5 years old. The high-tech smartphone factory, that's about 5 years ago. I feel like one of the latest things I saw was the electric motorcycles for taxis. Whenever I go with people there, I'm like, don't take the motorcycle taxi, it's too dangerous. But then when nobody's looking, I'm on a motorcycle taxi because it's so fun. And now they're electric. And I'm like, how does that work? Because the battery goes dead and the guy's done for the day. Nope. Pull into the station, pull out the massive battery pack and shove in a new one, and off you go. Technology is exciting, but the most exciting thing for me is how people are learning to live together after something so horrible as this. So if I had my choice, I'd spend the whole time with you just talking about that, putting the pieces together. How do you actually really learn to live and trust after something as horrific as that? I know some of you have watched a documentary, you got a fair amount and a background. Some, I was told, not a whole lot of background, and so I'm going to kind of just whip through here. 1990, that's our cute little family there. When we moved to Rwanda in 1990, and as you heard, we were building schools and partnering just with the people to try to make life better. Really was a fun place to raise our kids. Our kids have wonderful, fun memories from that time together there. But then, of course, after 4 years, this horrible thing was launched that's called a genocide. This was not a storm that was inevitable. This was so man-made. And people often ask, did you see it coming? And we'll probably dig into that a little more. It's interesting, I heard your figure of over 800,000, and that's the figure that I believed for a long time, until recent studies showed how they were messing with the census in the country. And of course, they're still digging up bodies even now whenever somebody's in their garden and they come across bones. So when you talk about it affecting people, it has these different ways that sometimes I'm sure the people of Rwanda must wonder, will it ever be kind of not part of our life? And for this generation, this is the big question. When I first made this slide, I said, can people who've been killing each other live peacefully? And they're like, no, that's not right. This isn't a story of people killing each other. This is a group being targeted. That's what genocide is. It's a group being targeted for extermination. So then I started thinking of somebody in specific, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. But Filbert, can he live next to people he failed to kill? He was involved in killing. Can he live peacefully next to people he failed to kill? I'm going to dig into some of maybe the nitty-gritty of this timeline and things like that if you ask questions. So I'm going to kind of skip over that right now. I want your questions to direct it. We'll come back to the Rwandan Patriotic Front and who they are in a minute. But I want to just spend a moment here on this picture. These are the architects of the genocide. Small group of men and women. I was actually talking with some middle schoolers not so long ago and asking, how could they have been thwarted? Who could have stood in their way? Who could stand in the way of genocide? You know, I mean, the UN was there with 2,500 soldiers. Surely they could have stood in the way. After World War II, the Holocaust, the soldiers come to these camps and they find these gas chambers, these exterminations. They find people stacked and like walking skeletons, and they're like, no, this can never happen again. And now we've got an army there in place, and it's happening. And instead of calling for an army, we remove the army. And I was interested in this one middle schooler, his response. Who could have stood in the way of these people? He said, maybe their closest friends. And I'm like, whoa. I was kind of expecting religious leaders get in their way. Education people get in their way. Just community leaders get in the way of genocide. But he brought it right home for me. Sometimes it's our closest friends. I mean, my son told me once, I guess he was reading a book. He said the idea of this book, which he said he felt was really valuable. And I mean, I say my son, he's in his 30s. And he said, you're the compilation of your 5 closest friends. And I'm like, whoa, I hope that's not scary. And I know it's not exactly true, but I really appreciated, you know, the idea, the architects of the genocide. And I also put this picture up here to be really clear. This is not a tribal story. This is a political story. And right now, for you guys, I mean, when I was telling this story in 2005 or 8 or 10 even, you know, talk about politics and it's a political story, America was very different then. I talk to you now and tell you this is a political story when, you know, it was hard to appoint a speaker in the House. You kind of understand this a little closer, I think. It comes a little closer to home. This is an illegal seizure of power. This was a coup. This was a group of extremists who were not satisfied with the idea of everybody having a voice. They wanted to hang on to power. So there was some ethnic tensions, but the majority was marrying the minority marrying by the thousands. Really hard to find, at least in some parts of Rwanda, people who don't have an uncle or an aunt or a cousin whose parent or who the adult themselves has a different mark on their ID card than them. I find it hard to use the term Hutu and Tutsi because there's so much of that intermarriage. I would say so much of that love that was happening before the genocide. So now how are we gonna, I don't want to write a 70s song or anything. Okay, I just made that line up. But how are we going to break up the love in this country is really what this story is about. And their main agenda, their first agenda, is exterminating the enemy. This idea that, I don't even like to read this sentence. I wrote it probably 18 years ago when I first started traveling to schools, trying to figure out how do you explain genocide, especially as you go down to middle school or something like that, you know. And the reason I've stuck with this is probably because it still has a tiny place in my brain. Not that I want to kill anybody, but still sometimes somebody cuts me off on the highway and it's just easier to think it'd be better without those kind of drivers. You know what I mean? That we're going to solve a problem by getting rid, by eliminating, temporary at best, genocide at worst. So we'll come back to that. The quick little timeline I want to give you. We've been in the country for 4 years. We thought we had peace in the previous August. They had a peace agreement. I heard the explosion around 8 o'clock Wednesday night, April 6th. Didn't know what it was. Found out it was the president's plane. The extremists will blame his death on the minority. They'll say we've got to eliminate the minority. We tried to kill them at the time of independence, years leading up to 62. We should have killed them all. Babies, grandmas, we're going to do it right this time. And they launched this horrific thing that we call now genocide against the Tutsi. The prime minister there on the far right, she's killed on Thursday. The UN soldiers who are supposed to be protecting her are told to lay down their weapons. They're taken prisoners. The 10 Belgians are killed, chopped. Some of these things, I just don't want to say them fast. In fact, some of these things, I don't want to say them. I think about their families. What if one of their nieces or nephews is one of your cousins, you know? They killed them and they chopped them into pieces to give this horrific, brutal message to the world. Get out of Rwanda. To the UN, get out. To the foreigners, get out. And it worked unbelievably well. Most all of the UN left, and maybe in our conversation time we'll talk about the handful of UN soldiers who stayed. But I was Zooming with some kids in Poland this morning, and I usually ask students before they ask a question, what do you love doing? And one of the girls there at the American school in Warsaw said, Model UN, which is free time. She likes doing Model UN, and I love that. I mean, but here we are at the Security Council. The decision is being made here. And if you want to dig deeper in the story, you may watch the documentary, if you haven't already, Ghost of Rwanda. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to watch. I always tell people don't do it alone. But you'll hear some incredibly moving and powerful and meaningful stories as you try to unpack why we did, not just why would neighbors do that to neighbors, but why would global neighbors abandon? And people often say, what, could America have done? And I'm like, well, what we could have done was not use our influence and our power to withdraw the help that was already there. So, yeah, if you want to talk about the UN, definitely we'll dig into that. This whole idea of creating an enemy. Enemies are not born, enemies are constructed. And they had no social media, so using the radio. And the same message I hear today, we heard then in Rwanda, only it was in Kinyarwanda, so I learned to speak French, but not Kinyarwanda. So I didn't hear the messages, but my coworkers, my neighbors, my friends, they all heard that message, and they told me, yeah, we're under attack, and there's not enough. That scarcity mindset, that fear mindset, and you want to control people, let's get them, let's use fear. At least in the short term, it'll work. Because you have to keep, with fear, we adjust and acclimate, then you got to ramp it up some more, and you got to ramp it up some more. And so I'm going to just touch on a story here that some of you saw in the film. I'll go a little deeper than what you saw in the film. Wednesday night, the plane is shut down. Thursday, the American government is saying, stay in your house. The Rwandan Patriotic Front will take over in a couple of days. It'll be more dangerous to try to evacuate. Thursday is the day that the UN soldiers were killed. Thursday night, a gang came to our gate. We're putting our kids to bed in the hallway, our kids 10, 7, and 5. We're putting them to bed in the hallway, just trying to get as many brick walls between us and the bullets that are flying outside. And unbeknownst to us, a gang has gathered at our gate. And our neighbor ladies, when they heard it, they came to the gate. They pushed through the crowd. They got between the gang and our gate. And they said, no, you can't go in. They started literally pleading for our lives. We were less than 100 feet away. We had no idea what was going on outside. And we learned about it the next morning. The young lady who lived and worked in our house from Rwanda, she was talking to the neighbors through the fence, and they're like, yeah, they were here last night. They wanted to kill your family here. And I asked Anita, the young lady who heard this story, what did the neighbor lady say? She said, well, basically, they told him that you weren't Belgian. I mean, that day, Belgian UN soldiers have been killed. There was a wild rumor going around that Belgium was involved in shooting down the plane. Wild rumors fly during this time. They told him you weren't Belgian in case maybe they just, mistook this white family for a Belgian family. They told them about little acts of kindness that you guys had done over the years, like taking a pregnant lady to the hospital in the middle of the night. And then they told them how your kids played with their kids. And I'm like, really? Really? And I've thought about that story untold times over the years. At the beginning, I didn't think a lot because I don't think I had the emotional bandwidth to process that we were that close, our family, to being part of that more than 1 million who were killed. But also, it's just so mind-boggling. Sometimes we don't know what to do. And in recent years, I've just really dove into how does the brain work? Because I think there's a lot of answers there. In fact, I think if there's one thing we should teach in school, it's how the brain works. And do we have some biology okays for that? Anybody here? This is my little version of it, okay? This is my simple version. And so I often oversimplify things, but basically we all are familiar with the fight-flight part of the thing, and you dig a little deeper, you find out, the amygdala is controlling that. Man, the amygdala can be like a hijack, and the good place, Dan Siegel, check him out on YouTube, neuroplastic, what was you, no, he uses upstairs brain and downstairs brain. So if you're really curious about this, just search Dan Siegel, upstairs brain, downstairs brain. And he talks about how basically the upstairs brain goes offline when it gets when the whole brain kind of gets hijacked by the amygdala. So I want you to, it's pretty much a no-brainer that somebody who's there at our house to kill is down there in the fight-flight part, eh? And so these ladies, they could have said, what's wrong with you? Those are just innocent people in there. There's just children in there. And it would have driven them deeper downstairs in their brain. But instead, these ladies choose stories. Oh my goodness. Friday, I was with a survivor of the genocide at Northampton High School. And Omar was 10 at the time. He survived a massacre at Nyamata Church of more than 10,000 people. He survived under the bodies. His story is just, I mean, for me, I was having a hard time. Okay, you see me getting a little emotional now. If we talk later about remembering and reliving, I don't have any problem with tears. I used to have a knot in my stomach when I told these stories. That's reliving and how dealing with it. I didn't have that, but on Friday with Omar, I came really close because our oldest was 10 years old at that time. And when Omar fled the church, and he had a little rosary with him and a little prayer book. This 10-year-old boy is praying whatever he remembers of the rosary in his prayer book, and then he's telling these kids at Northampton High School, don't ever give up. And I'm like, holy cow. If you ever heard a powerful message, don't give up, you think of this little 10-year-old boy being hunted by dogs. He says this, we were hunted by dogs, and then he quickly looks over at the teacher who he'd been staying at her house, and she had a dog. He said, but I like your dog. He said, but he'd been hunted by dogs. He said, don't give up. Now why did I go off on Omar? I was talking about the brain, upstairs, downstairs, the power of stories. Oh yeah, because Omar began his presentation with the healing power of stories. Omar said to the kids in the classroom, don't feel sorry for me. I mean, yeah, his dad was killed, his brother was killed. One of his memories of the church is a soldier busting a little narrow window, putting his assault rifle, and he said, emptying 3 magazines into the church. And I'm like, how does a 10-year-old kid? No, don't feel bad for me, he says, because I'm basically, okay, I think I didn't really hear his words because I hijacked what he said because I was so there. I'm such a believer in finding the good. And I don't think he said that, but he said something like that. Don't feel sorry for me because I'm finding the good all the time, everywhere. And that ability to find the good has been one of my ways of healing after this genocide. Now, I've totally gone off script here, 1239. These ladies use that method of telling stories, not to get everybody out of their downstairs brain, but just the leader maybe, or the person close to the leader. And to me, what's even more important about this tool isn't recognizing when somebody else is in their downstairs brain, it's recognizing when I'm in my downstairs brain. And what's my strategy to get out of there? And to get in the good place again. And what are things that can come to me? What do I watch? What movies, what stuff do I watch that puts me in my downstairs? You know, it's not just fear that puts us downstairs. It's helplessness that puts us down there. It's frustration that puts us down there and stuff. And sometimes we need to be there. That's why our brain is like that. It's a good thing to survive. But other times we're down there when we don't need to be. When I would be so much better in my upstairs brain. So I could go on and on about it, but this is just one of the little things about how the brain works and how I try to think, especially when people ask, why did they do it? It's not a full answer. You can't just say they were in their downstairs brain. How did they get there? Wow. You mean they went through 3 years of war? Yeah, that was really hard on the brain. And they were susceptible to threats. Fear was a major part of their thinking. So it wouldn't take much to trigger and send them down there and then do things you never would have imagined doing before in other situations. The American government says, like all governments, they were telling their citizens, get out of Rwanda. And I just want to, because you heard, at least a good chunk of you heard the story, not just for those who didn't, but I wanted to just touch on one thing that's really important to me. My mom and dad were there at the time, so you can begin to imagine the level of complexity there. They're grandkids. I'm surprised I got this far in the presentation. I haven't shown you any pictures of my grandsons. They're perfect little guys. Okay, do we go there now? I think we better. I just have so much fun. I mean, they're all over the place probably here. If I just come back to my pictures, we were just in, okay, that's Leo. Leo is going to be 1 next month. And these are Lisa's sons. Oh, this was a fun. The sunlight was just right. There's Kai. Kai just turned 2, sitting next to his mom. So I think about my dad. I don't talk about him that much. He's such a good friend in public, because you can tell, wrestling. But like I said, tears are not the issue, and I don't have a knot in my stomach. But it was a tough conversation between Dad and I when I told him I'm staying. And I can only imagine now. I'm actually older now than my dad was then. I'm 65. He was 62 at the time. And when he finally saw that I was going to stay, he said, well, then I'm staying with you. I'm like, no, Dad. You got to take the kids. You got to take Teresa and the kids to safety. And I want to just make it really clear with you that I didn't make this decision by myself. Teresa and I together, we made the decision that I would stay. You see, they told us, get your family together. We're driving out of here. But they also told us, don't bring any Rwandans. And this young lady on the far right there, she lived and worked at home. She loved on her kids. When somebody loves on your kids, that's like fast track to family. So it wasn't like our family and Rwanda. People in Rwanda had become like family. And we couldn't, we condemned the planners of the genocide for targeting people to kill just because of their ID card. And we, leaders in the modern world, make a decision, the American government, that, and I understand, your citizens' safety, your first priority, but don't you have a plan for the other people? Don't you? And when they said you can't bring any Rwandans, they treated Rwandans with so much, Rwandans treated foreigners with so much respect and privilege. My wife and I together, we thought maybe we can use that privilege and help this young lady and the young man there on your left, who he was the watchman. The plane was shot down, and an hour later, roadblocks were up all over the place. He couldn't get home. And so those two people had Tutsi ID cards. They were marked to be killed. So they, along with the U.S. government, who said you can't bring any Rwandans, that's kind of why I stayed. And not knowing that more than 1 million people would be killed, not knowing it would go on more than 3 months, a lot of stuff I didn't know, not knowing most of the UN would leave. But what I knew was those people were there in our house, and maybe I could make a difference. And so I really want to mind our time here, and let's just jump. Okay, I know this can seem sort of like a little bit of a repeat, but I got 2 reasons for doing this. One of the Rwandan men I was working with, you remember in the film, hey, this was the guy, they came to kill the people in his house, he offers them chickens. They're his neighbors. He's not a foreigner. He doesn't have the privilege of foreigners. He doesn't have a gun, but he has a reputation for integrity. What you believe and what you do, boom, they're right there together. The local government guy, who's of the majority, married to a lady who's of the minority, comes to him and says, the local neighborhood, like mini mayor, the counselor in the neighborhood, I don't know if I can protect my wife and kids, Gasikwa, can they come to your house? And so it's going to be Gasikwa's integrity that this guy is counting on to protect his wife and kids, not a gun. And I suppose this story shouldn't be a surprise when you know Gasikwa. That, he comes out and instead of saying to his neighbors, let's call one of them Bernard. Bernard, you should be ashamed of yourself. You know these are just women and children and stuff. You know they're our neighbors. You know they're not. Would have driven him deeper in his downstairs brain. But instead he comes out and he goes, Bernard, these are hard times, huh? Your kids are probably hungry. Do you want some chickens? I don't think any of the people who were involved with killing were 100% committed killers. I think they're all different degrees of motivation and fear and perhaps anger and bitterness and stuff. But talk about moving from your downstairs brain to your upstairs brain. You want to take some chickens home tonight to your kids. And I just impose these words: respect, empathy, and inclusion. There are a couple of values that are really central to our work, and how respect for me is an assumption of value. I come here and my respect is about an assumption of value in the time we have, and a value in each one of you in your life. We just came through MLK, Martin Luther King Day, honoring, and the idea of the value of every person, knowing how valuable you are, was so central to his work. And when we have that assumption of value, then empathy comes naturally. Empathy with Gasikwa, oh my goodness, through kindness, moves from the downstairs to the upstairs. And Gasikwa is like my favorite example of empathy first. I do not usually respond to crisis with empathy first. I don't respond to some sort of criticism or attack is a little too strong, but something uncomfortable. My first response is not empathy, but I want it. And I'm working to rewire my brain towards that I could actually respond with empathy. So when the guy cuts me off on the road, I'm not like, what a jerk, but I'm like, I wonder if he just got a call and he's headed to the hospital. I don't know. But to replace judgment with curiosity. Where are my glasses? Did I get rid of those out of there? Where's my little... These are my favorite glasses right here. To replace judgment with curiosity, to replace this idea that my world will be better without this exclude. We're going to solve the problem with. Oh, by the way, okay, you don't have to pull your phones out right now, but I know they said put your phones away. But if you see something you want to remember and take a picture of, get your phone out and take a picture of it. But don't do it just to please me. I mean, okay, it would be nice, but don't do it right now. You can do it later on another picture. But let's get back here to Gasikwa for a moment. This idea of reframing. Now I'm diving into just some of the tools that have been so valuable, and some of the tools for me personally, and some of the tools that I think have been happening in Rwanda. You see, one of the ways that I find freedom from anger and bitterness, that's my basic definition of forgiveness. Freedom from anger and bitterness. Doesn't have anything to do with whether the person who harmed me deserves it or not, whether they're sorry or not. It has to do with me getting free from anger. Reconciliation, that might have to do with whether they are sorry or not. Can we actually come together? That isn't always safe. It's not universal. But the idea of getting free from anger and bitterness, directly related to what I call one thing thinking. And that would probably be a really good time to transition to Maria and Filbert, and then to transition to some questions and conversation. Maria, you love this woman from the moment you see her warm smile and you hear her story. You're just blown away. Her courage, her level of strength and resilience. She lost her husband and sons. She and her husband split up, her taking the daughter, her husband taking the boys, hoping that maybe as 3 or 2 we might survive hiding. Someone might give us some food. A little easier if we're not 5 of us. And it worked for her and the little girl, and not for her husband and son. She would introduce the guy next to her, Filbert, as an incredibly valued family friend. I can't imagine planting time, harvest time. I can't imagine even the in-between time without him and all the friends he brings to help me. My goodness, he does things for me like my sons would have done if they were here. Now, when she made that statement, does things for me like my sons would if they're here, I already knew the other part of the story, that Filbert was in the gang who killed her husband and sons. So I'm already struggling And she goes, well, he does things for me like my, meaning a nice thing. He does things like my sons would have done. Right away, I fire in my brain thinking, yeah, well, if he wouldn't have killed him, they'd be here to do it for you. You don't hear any reconciliation there. You sure don't hear any empathy there. You might hear anger there. What you're hearing is somebody who was stuck in 1994. 25 years later, I'm still wrestling with stuff I'm stuck in 1994 with. Because I'm still defining him by one thing, the worst thing that I could imagine, that I saw people do. And this one thing thinking is my greatest enemy to getting free from anger and bitterness. Maria, kind of the shorter version of this story, she'll tell how initially when he got out of jail, didn't want anything to do with each other. I mean, they understandably tried to avoid each other. He came back to town. That's where their family, their property wasn't real easy to sell and pack up and move somewhere else. She didn't have that luxury. But then the government had this great program to help build homes, and you do the work, make the adobe bricks and stuff, and we'll give you the roofing sheets, something like that. And she starts to see Filbert a little bit different. But you know what the real turning point, she says, was with Filbert? I mean, it was meaningful when he confessed and he came and apologized to her. She said that was important to hear, to experience. But when he told her where her husband and sons were buried, she says that was a turning point. And for me, I'm thinking, which way? Huh? You could be even more angry as you come here. But no, I hadn't lived in her shoes. I didn't know what it was like for years to not know where your husband and sons were buried, to even wonder maybe one of those boys is still alive. And so this process over time of Maria seeing Filbert as more than the killer. I mean, shoot, for us, somebody betrays you, somebody, I don't know, does you wrong in sports or in school or something like that. That can be bad enough, But how do you not see somebody as one thing when they take your they take your family from you? And Maria, just over the years, bit by bit, I would put forth, she was forming new neural pathways in her brain. Because I'm often asking the question, like so many people who learn about the genocide, and even like Rwandans are asking, how can somebody go from kind and generous to a murderer? What is that like? What does it take? How does that happen? And we know it happens. We know people change for harmful. I don't want to say change for bad, because I'm really trying to get away from good guy, bad guy talking and thinking, because I think that's really not helpful for me in understanding how we are, who we are, and how we are. So I think about harmful things people do, or even bad things, but we know that happens. People can seemingly change and do harmful things because we see the bodies. What's really hard to believe is, can they ever be trusted again? And not just trusted, but could they be a better neighbor now than they were before the genocide? I would put forth that Maria says, no question, with Filbert, he's one of our best friends, my daughter and I. To the point that when the daughter grew up and got married, they invited him to the wedding. And I heard that, and again, I'm stuck in that, and I'm like, oh. And they didn't just invite him, because Lisa had just gotten married a couple years ago, the little mom of our grandsons. We were just fresh, that was, 2019, fresh out of that wedding. And I'm like, Maria, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have asked her, but I just felt like I had to. Maria, and maybe I thought I had the privilege to ask her because I stayed during anyway, I said, Maria, didn't you have some family who survived and came to the wedding? She said, yeah. And I said, well, weren't they angry? She says, yeah. Well, why'd you do it? She says, because it was my house. And I'm like, whoa. Maria is in charge of Maria. Maria's healing, Maria's journey, Maria's everything. Maria doesn't let other people decide for her. And you know what she said? As quick as I said, weren't they angry? Why'd you do it? she like jumped out of the spotlight and put Filbert in the spotlight and said, but his family was angry at him when my daughter had children and asked him to be the godfather to those children. And my initial response, because I was still sort of stuck in 94, I don't give a rip about him and his family. But today I really do. Today I do give a rip about him and his family because I'm getting free from the anger and bitterness because I'm trying to get free from one thing thinking, defining people by the worst thing that they've done. And I think I'm headed that direction because Maria is such an inspiration. Man, Maria did that. And look how free she is. Look how kind-hearted she is. I honestly didn't even want Filbert in the picture. I asked Maria for a picture, and somebody must have said, Filbert, go get in the picture. And I'm ashamed to say that I was like, oh, I don't want him in the picture. And then I'm like, oh, well, I'll just crop him out. And I'm like, are you kidding me, Carl? You're standing next to this incredibly strong, courageous woman, and you're thinking those thoughts? And so, yeah, I need to own those thoughts, but I also know that I can change and I can make new pathways in my brain. I can fire to rewire it. I'll send you down a wonderful rabbit hole on YouTube. Dr. Joe, fire to rewire. Okay, we got to get into here. Oh my goodness, look at the, okay. So let's just back up here for a moment. Maria and Filbert, they are the kind of, we zoomed in on Maria and Filbert. Let's back up to, how does Filbert get out of jail? Okay? How do the thousands, tens of thousands of people who went to jail get out? One would be regular, okay, let's go ahead over here. One would be kind of the regular punitive, the regular court system as we understand it, right? Who's to blame? Punish them, justice. But that would take more than 100 years with over 200,000 people. They don't have the money, they don't have the lawyers and stuff. So they went back deep in their history and they went to something that we've discovered all around the world, particularly with indigenous nations, a restorative approach to harm. Not a punitive approach, but a restorative. And not that every indigenous population is perfect either, but we've seen this again and again in studies. New Zealand, all over Canada seems like they're into it deeper in understanding than we seem, but we're working on it here in America too. So they went to this idea. This is super oversimplified, so forgive me if I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence on this, but I just want to try to get on the same page. We're not so interested in blaming as we are understanding the harm so we can make a decent repair plan. And we can't just have it in the hands of lawyers and judges. Everybody's got to give us their voice to understand. A little more sophisticated drawing that I came up with is this idea here of, again, blame, punish, and justice. Or what if justice isn't our end priority? What if our most important priority is not making somebody pay? You know, that's this word retributive, huh? I just shortcut it to punitive, which is not a fair shortcut, but not making people pay. Wait a minute, if they don't pay, won't they do it again? How many people who have, quote, paid don't do it again? I mean, I get caught usually in something. I try to figure out how to do it without getting caught. And I mean, you know, that's just, I don't know if that's human nature. So, how are we going to learn the truth? And don't try to unpack the harm without first having a safe place to do it. Build that community. That's why when we talk about restorative practices in school, we're talking about circles and we're talking about building relationships and having tools and mechanisms. Just, mechanisms sound so sterile, but having practices, just habits of open communication, habits of honesty, habits of even vulnerability and stuff. So when things get to be really ugly and we're trying to understand the harm, we already have this really important foundation in place of the community and safety there. And then we can try to unpack the harm, which is really a hard thing when you're talking genocide, hey? And how are we going to repair that? And justice, how will that figure into the repair plan? But our ultimate goal is healing. And this, we're always going to have this. Some people say, you know, could you do this in America? We are already. Some schools are doing it in the schools, some communities, some states, some state attorney general, is that what they're called, state attorney general? Yeah. Some of those people, this lady in Florida, I forget how many years ago, it's present. We will always have the punitive system, though, because this is the one when it's nothing but adversarial. This is the beautiful one when it gets collaborative and everybody is part of that thing. So the way that it played out in Rwanda was they set up, and you who studied, you're familiar with Gacaca, huh? These community courts. Pick a committee of people you trust. And Rwanda has in their constitution that 1/3 of every decision-making group has to be women. From parliament to the Gacaca committee, 1/3 of any decision-making group has to be women. Because we're trying to rebuild trust. How foolish would it be to try to rebuild trust and suppress the rights of women? Instead, we take advantage of the power and the skills and the strength and the courage and the compassion as in this trust rebuilding exercise. And say you're Filbert. You don't know when you're going to get a regular trial, but Gacaca, which is not really a trial. That's why I'm coming to understand it more and more. Just the other day I was telling somebody, Gacaca was for the guilty. Okay? So let's not even try to compare it. There's no defense lawyers. There's no prosecutors. This is a way to find healing. Are you ready to share what you did in front of the people you did it to, or who survived, or who watched you do it? Are you ready to answer their questions? Are you ready to tell the truth and begin engaging, actually talking again? What's going to be a place that'll give us permission to talk about these really hard things? How can we understand the harm? And afterwards, this committee will decide, I think this guy is safe to go to the repair plan in the community. Did you hear the way he answered the questions? Did you hear the way he kind of hemmed and hawed and whatever? I don't know what their criteria was. There were more than 12,000 of these courts. Some of them leaned heavy, sending them back to jail. Others of them were like way heavy and sending them to the community repair plan. Some in between and stuff, but they would make that decision. Talk about empowering. History, colonialism, one of the things of colonialism, and I'm no history expert, but I lived there, I lived on the continent for 13 years, and one of the things that I really came away with was this horrible message that says, you can't solve your own problems. Somebody else is going to do that. Man, talk about empowering. I'm not expecting the government to solve. They did more than 1.9 million cases. That just is a number I can't even wrap my head around. Tens of thousands of people went through Gacaca. The decisions were made. And yeah, it's open to exploiting abuse. It's open to taking advantage of. The restorative process is not a hard cut and dried. It's messy and stuff. But they pushed through that. And those that did go on to the community service, this is 40 men. I was there with high school kids, maybe 2015. And these men, the kids were asking them questions for about 2 hours about their experience. And then we turned it around and said, what do you want to ask the kids? And Charlotte is here responding to a question. You've studied the Holocaust. You've been here to Rwanda. You've seen the genocide. What difference does it make? And I'm like, dang, that's a hard question. When I looked at students, when Charlotte raised her hand, I'm like, yeah. She comes up. She says, to be honest, I don't know. But one thing I do know is when I go back home, I'm going to make sure that I get closer to people who I consider different from me. And I'm like, dang, home run. And so Filbert would have gone through something like that. I don't know about exactly Filbert and Maria's story and stuff, but this idea of giving people a chance to build roads. I know one kid said to me, wait, people who did genocide get community service? That's like a slap on the wrist. And I totally get that when you're thinking about this idea of transactional, somebody's got to pay. I mean, that kid has been screwing around all school year. They need to feel the consequences of what. Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's right. The bell was like, cut that out.
One of the one that gives them the choice to stay or go. If they stay, they can ask a couple questions. And
Yeah.
if they want, I don't know.
You heard that? You are free to go. There will be no. Oh, of course. You guys, everybody knows you got a life and you got other things you have to do. So do not feel this is not the walk of shame. This is just the walk of reality. The reality of school. Yeah, thanks, guys.